Batman fans are going crazy with Bruce Timm releasing a statement about how Batman doesn't have good female villains. They're going wild, like, oh, how dare Bruce Timm say this? How dare he? Does he know anything about the characters? I think he does, considering he worked on Batman the Animated Series. And I do think this is the thing that people really need to accept about Batman the Animated Series, because this is the thing that bothers me when it comes to like modern superheroes, right? Everyone agrees that newer stuff is terrible, that there's been a massive decline in quality, the artwork is bad, the writing is bad, the characters are bad. They fail to like evolve the storylines in any meaningful capacity. Like they can't do anything, right? But instead of like, moving on with their lives and like consuming other like better media, like manga, people just sit there and try to say that like, the old stuff was good. Alan Moore was a great creator. Batman the Animated Series was the definitive version of the Batman show. Like, you should just watch that going forward. Like, nothing they ever do will ever top Batman the Animated Series. And it's interesting having gone back to Batman the Animated Series, watched it, consumed the product, and like thinking about it for so long, like I've realized that the show isn't very good, right? The show does not live up to the hype that people set for it. The idea that it's one of the best Western shows ever produced and that it's an amazing adaptation of the comics, right? Batman the Animated Series essentially does one thing well, is that it gives you an origin story for most iconic villains, right? There are a handful of like reasonably well produced episodes, but the vast majority of them are just repetitive, schlocky, just boring, that that just don't really progress or go anywhere, right? Batman the Animated Series is essentially an animated version of the comics, right? Where things continue perpetually. There is no progression. There are no real character arcs. There is no real like conclusion. The implication is that everything just continues happening forever, right? And again, like there are sequel shows, there are like, alternate universe shows, like there are like, follow-ups to this series, but they're all inherently contradictory to what Batman the Animated Series established, right? There are a lot of contradicting elements in the DCAU. It is why it needs to be acknowledged that, this show does have a lot of problems. It's not very good. It doesn't have good animation. It doesn't have good action. And a lot of the aspects of it are, by their nature, extraordinarily woke. This is the thing that people don't want to admit about Batman the Animated Series, that the people behind it were always pushing their Marxist political ideology, right? They really were pushing this idea that wokeness was the real driving force behind Batman's actions, right? They were really trying to shove a 90s version of the same ideology into children's faces. And it has been so long, people have like consumed the product for their entire lives that people no longer notice or care about it or assume it was simply better back then, when in reality it was always propaganda. It was always trying to manipulate you. It was always trying to trick you into thinking that this is how things actually should work, right? This is how the world actually is, right? Batman, in a sense, has become the face for like everything wrong with modern comics. Well, Superman, I suppose, as well. Like they essentially just bombard young viewers with this idea that like this show is the best, it's so compelling, it's so smart, it's so intelligent. Like look at all these deep, complex ideas, but like the reality, the implication is that these shows are pushing a Marxist ideology. These shows are pushing the message, and it's interesting to me to see people like finally start to acknowledge that like Bruce Timm is absolutely part of the problem, and he has been for a long time. That Mark Hamill is part of the problem, and he has been for a long time. That all these golden cow creators that people used to love, people like George Lucas and Spielberg and like Kathleen Kennedy, like they've all been doing their thing since they started producing content, right? Like everything is like this. And it needs to be soundly rejected by the general population. It isn't enough to reject the new stuff. We also have to look back and start rejecting the old stuff. We have to take off the nostalgia goggles and acknowledge that Batman the Animated Series absolutely cannot compete with superior Japanese animation and storytelling, right? That the Batman character is nothing but a proxy vehicle to push insane ideologies onto children, right? Every comic book character is a propaganda vehicle. That is their primary purpose. That's why they've been pushed so long. Like comic books have been propaganda longer than I think any other entertainment medium, just because of just how easy they are to print and just slip things under the radar so people don't notice them. Like this is nothing new. Again, and the fans have to accept that. Batman is not some beacon of morality. He's not some god, right? He's not real, essentially. His methodology would never work, right? His villains would never do what they do. Like, Batman would not stop them the way that he does, right? The entire world created by the entire Batman animated universe is a lie. It is something that people just cannot wrap their heads around. That the ideas pushed forward by this children's TV show are manipulative, conniving, and disgusting, right? People don't want to admit that this show was never good, right? People don't want to admit that woke culture has always been a part of everything they like, unless you're a Nintendo fan, have always been a part of everything they ever liked, everything they ever worshipped, everything they ever like spent all their time on. Like it is something that society right now needs to recover from. They need to accept that this propaganda needs to be rejected.